So story telling in business, communicating with stories. Why? Well, maybe first, before we jump into a question, back to communication preferences. So, we've talked a lot about different ways of communication. We've gone back to the kind of the fundamentals of communication preferences, around, you have creative preference, you have a logical preference, procedural preference, and then the interpersonal preference. So everybody communicates differently. Everybody also, receives information a little bit differently. They have a preference around how they receive information. Stories, though, transcend all preferences. Everybody loves a story. You only need to actually open a conversation with, let me tell you a story, and it's almost inbuilt. It's very physical. Everybody immediately jumps to attention if you say the phrase, let me tell you a story. It's an automatic human response because it's built in from when we were still cavemen. So stories are a very good way of transcending communication preferences, and they will always grab an initial amount of intention. But always good to come back to the communication preferences. So what would we use stories for in business? I mean, why are we talking about storytelling in business? Why would we use stories in business?
To inspire and make a point.
Definitely make a point, yeah. And inspire.
Interest.
Go ahead, Jamie. I didn't quite catch you.
Just to catch people's interest, so to draw them in, like create kind of a link between you two, like I don't know, like so people can relate to you and you can relate to them. It feels more familiar. Like so, if you're with someone and it's not a very familiar environment, a story can sort of create a bond or a link between you.
Brilliant, absolutely. Stories are very relatable. Well, I mean, depending a bit on the story, but especially if you're focused on business and you bring business relevant stories, it's always relatable. It's a good way of building relationships. Absolutely.
I feel like most of my stories aren't very relatable. They're all weird stuff that's happened.
Well, even those stories are good, especially over a pint of beer or something like that, right? Yeah, so stories can really create a connection. Everyone will connect somehow with a story, and that's how it transcends potentially the communication preferences as well, because of that relatability to the story. And people will, if you pick the story well, people will always find something within a story that they will have experienced before, or they can directly relate to, or they have some kind of connection or empathy towards, right? Any kind of story. So all very, very good. Sarah, you mentioned about inspiration. You can use stories, especially in the business context, to really motivate people as well and inspire them. If you can find a good story that will inspire people to achieve a higher level of performance or deliver higher results, and that's always a good way to motivate and inspire people, especially if you can link it to any kind of vision, for example, or any kind of objective or goal. So, very good for getting things done. So stories. How many of you watched my little video as pre-work?
It's the first time I haven't had time to actually watch your free video. I admit I haven't actually seen it yet. Like you've never asked before. Like all the other times I've always watched it, and then the one time I didn't have time.
That's all right. No stress. No stress.
I did, yeah. I love the horse story. I think we talked about it when we talked about like team and like moving people or something. I don't know what was the title of the workshop. So I remember that story, and I was happy to hear it again. And it's a great story.
Exactly, the horse story. It's one of my favorites for project management. So yeah, the horse story. So finding a story that you can relate to and connect it then to an experience around business is super powerful, because then you might not remember all of the content or the workshop or the training, but you remembered the story about a horse. And it's very difficult to forget a story about a horse once you've heard it, and then it's about how to steer people and manage people. So you remember that for a very, very long time. You remember it much better than me just talking about a Gantt chart, for example. So stories are good. So give me just a quick 60 seconds of a story you have to tell around business. Doesn't matter what the story is, doesn't matter around what it's related to in business. Have a quick think and see if you can give me a quick story. Share a story with us. Go on, Sarah. Go on, Jamie. Go for it.
That's why I was just going to ask a story about something business related.
Yep, try and relate it to business. If you're struggling, doesn't matter. Any little story.
Sarah, did you want to go?
Well, I have a story that's about focus, like maybe grounding yourself and like gaining your intuition and focus. And sometimes in business you also have to make like some decisions based on your instinct, so maybe that would fit. I don't know. It's a nice story. So in Belgrade there are people who steal your wallets on the street. And of course you never get any of your documents back or anything, and it never happened to me. I've been living like 4 years in Belgrade and it never happened. But one day I was walking in town. It was winter, it was very crowded, and two people just like crowded in front of me, and I needed to stop for like 3 seconds. So I stopped, and then I continued to just walk, but something fell off. Like I didn't know, just something just wasn't like feeling right. So I grabbed my backpack to check if everything is there, and it was open, and my wallet was missing. And in my wallet I had like the rent for that month, I had all of my documents, credit cards, money. So like your heart drops and you start panicking right in that moment. And I was just standing there with the empty backpack on like in the middle of the street, and there was like a bunch of people around. Like I couldn't see anybody, nothing. And I was like, in that second I was just like, okay, like just like focus, like contain yourself, don't panic, and like let's see like if we can make this right. Like it was all happening in like 1 second, and maybe 50 or 60 meters in front of me, or even more, I saw just a regular guy in a green jacket, not looking like suspicious. He wasn't from any certain background or ethnicity, anything. But I don't know, I just started following him. And I followed him, and he enters the bakery shop, and I followed him into the bakery shop, and I just stood there like beside him. I didn't know like what was I doing. And he moved his arm a bit, and because my wallet is long and big, I could see like the definition of my wallet in his jacket, and and I just like sort of leaned in and whispered to him like, please, like, I won't tell anybody, like everything I have is in that wallet, just like give it back to me, please. And he was in a shock because he didn't know like how how I got there, like what was happening. Like I was whispering, I wasn't screaming or anything, and he just gave it back to me and like left the bakery, and that's like that's it.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Amazing story.
Yeah, and like it's really, I don't know, I was feeling sort of like bummed or depressed before that, and it like kicked in my natural instincts for survival, I guess. So like months after that, I was just feeling amazing about life and everything.
It's amazing. You should be like a spy or something with those kind of skills.
Yeah. And later on, like somebody told me, like if people didn't have like consciousness, or if they didn't feel guilty, nobody would ever be able to figure out like if anybody did anything wrong, like because like people, you can see it, I guess, in their walk or something feels off about them, and that's why you're able to spot them, because they act guilty if they are, in some sort of way. So yeah.
Very true. Nice story. Very nice indeed. I don't know how we can top that for stories now. Great story. Any other stories?
I have kind of like a business related one in like, I don't know, like because it's kind of relevant for me, like just because I just got pictures popping up on my phone now of like 2 years ago today, like that kind of thing, of like where I was 2 years ago, and like basically where I had moved to Germany, I was with a company and I was kind of in like a vicious circle of they weren't paying me because I couldn't get an apartment, but I couldn't get an apartment because they weren't paying me. Like the original thing was that they had me like a month not telling me where I was going to be going, so I was in an Airbnb and then hostels. So and then I ran out of money, and then I knew where I was going to be, but I didn't have enough money anymore to get a deposit on a flat. So I was just sort of like wandering around like like I don't know, like I wasn't very aggressive with them because I'd just left uni. I was sort of a bit worried, like, oh, if I get fired now, then I'm gonna lose everything. I'll never get paid, kind of thing. Um, and then like I just kept pictures popping up now of like what I was eating in a day. Like I'd skip breakfast, and then there was this tin in Germany in a shop called Norma, which was 52 cents, and the label just said Fleischgeschmack, so meat flavor. Um, but it was like lentils, like meat flavor lentils for 52 cents, and I would eat half of it for lunch and half for dinner. And I just get pictures now popping up on my phone of like 2 years ago today, like it was just this, and it just made me like feel really ill, but also feel really good because like now like I actually then had problems in other jobs because I wouldn't say I'm an aggressive person, but when people are like when the bosses are kind of taking the piss, I've like made a big point of it. Like for example, there was later on in that same company, someone was being like really, really unfair with one of the photographers because with COVID, like they'd moved her to another project, which wasn't her speciality, and they were just like being horrible to her, like, oh, you're doing it really bad, but like shouting at her for like, but I mean, it was just nothing to do with her actual job, and then I had like a massive go at the manager, and then I got put on the morning shift for 5 a.m. every morning. But like I don't know, I feel like it was cool as well because I think it's like important to learn to be like in a way kind of aggressive and that kind of thing, like, or at least sort of have that kind of to feel like you deserve more than like sleeping on the street and having like this tin of cat food looking weird, which is like been problematic, but now like in this company it's great because Tom treats us like a family, so like it's not it's weird. I don't know. Like I was kind of like a number in a huge company with like 17,000 employees, and they didn't really care if I had food on my plate or if I had somewhere to stay. Whereas Tom is like like he takes us to Serbia, he's sending me to Ghana, he's taking us to France. Like I've only been here a few months. Like I don't know, like I don't know. I think it's like, for me, it was like a really enriching experience in terms of like learning how to treat bosses and like if they like I went in originally with that point of view that they deserve respect and that I had to respect them, but like that now I'm just completely of the opinion of if someone wants my respect, they have to earn it, which like obviously Tom did. Like.
Excellent. No, I mean a nice story about your experiences and the need for a level of respect even from the boss, right? And absolutely it's a good story. Actually, you can really build that one for the future as well. Good story, like it.
Thank you.
Isabella.
I'm thinking, I don't know if I have so interesting stories, but mine was more, let's say, a cultural, some cultural differences that I had and that I faced in my first job. So I was working for KPMG in Italy. And I mean, being Brazilian, I was always very expansive. I don't know if that's the correct word, but I was always very open and intense, right? And then there was this client. So she was, let's say, the contact person from the client. And her and I kind of had a good relationship. So every time I would go to the client, we would go for lunch and talk about things. So and in fact, we're close until today. So it's not like I was thinking something else. But once I delivered everything I had to deliver, so once I completed the project, I sent out an email to her at like 8 in the evening, but really intense. And I wrote like 8 exclamation marks. And and that morning, on the following, and then I copied my boss and the senior at the time and the client. And then my boss got really, really angry with me. And then in the morning we met because we were traveling somewhere, and he really told me to never do it again. And he was really impressed. He said, like, in Italy, you don't do this kind of things. Please never put more than 1 exclamation mark. And I mean, that's not a big story, but that showed me that I needed to learn how to kind of stop myself sometimes, especially in front of people that wouldn't have the flexibility of understanding that occasion. So, I mean, it didn't work for me just for exclamation marks. I kind of learned how to be quieter and to step a bit down. And that helped me today working with Germans and working with different cultures. I learned how to. I learned the limit.
That's also a fantastic story, because sometimes it can be the smallest thing that catches you out on culture, right? And suddenly you don't even know why are people not liking this, because it would seem so simple. Yeah, it's another story. 3 fantastic stories. Absolutely 3 fantastic stories. Quick reflection on those stories, each one, because it really comes very nicely together. Jamie's just sent a picture of his food. That looks tasty. Very nice.
It looked the same as it tasted. It tasted the same as it looked like. It smelled rancid. It was 52 cents for an entire tin. Like.
Oh my
God. Is it worth 52 cents? It doesn't look like.
I mean, I got by on it, so.
So, quick reflection on the stories. Brilliant stories. These are the kind of experiences that you can use and then, build into solid business stories when you're trying to explain to other people a certain message. So if the message is focus, Sarah's got the perfect story, right? And the way, Sarah, that you set it up. So first of all, you set up the story saying it was going to be about focus and about concentration. So it was good. You set the scene very nicely. Then you went into, I think we've just lost Jamie. Hopefully he joins again. Then you went into, what was the dilemma? you know, your wallet being stolen. Then you walked through how you were going to solve that dilemma by following the man with the green jacket into the bakery. Then you ended it nicely with the resolution about getting your wallet back. And then at the end, then you came back to the result. You know, it was about in that moment having to focus and spotting the person that looked a bit guilty in the crowd, even if it wasn't such a conscious thought. So you had a very good structure for your story. Same, Isabella, you know, you set the scene up by saying it was about, you know, it's about cultural differences. Then you talked about the dilemma that you had in terms of how you were working with the client and finishing the project. And then you talked about how the result with the exclamation marks went badly, and then how you resolved that or used that experience then having to work with other cultures. So actually a really good story, all of these very good stories. And once you have a few experiences like that, you can kind of reuse those experiences on more and more stories. So Isabella, if you're trying to explain to, you know, somebody else about, you have to be a bit aware about culture, you know, especially you're working in different areas, you've got the perfect story to tell people then and prepare them for working with different cultures, right? So all of these stories are super. So let me present for a moment. Let me bring up a couple of slides. Should wake up and go to slideshow in just a second, hopefully. So the structure of any story, the setup, as we've just mentioned, you know, the beginning, what sets the dilemma up as the problem, what's going to be the problem that needs to be resolved. And then the middle part of the story is then, you know, working through the crisis. And then the end is then bringing that to some kind of resolution. And the stories, as you've just shown, don't have to be very long, but people will remember the stories as we go. At the end, it's always important, though, to bring it back, any story then back to, you know, the audience, the business context. That's always, you know, the lessons learned from the story is always good to bring it back to. The other thing to consider, I mean, the story structure is really straightforward. The other thing to consider then is kind of the push and the pull, or the fear and the energy. We talked in one session about managing people, about using the kind of push and pull method. Exactly the same in storytelling. So what might scare people a little bit? I mean, scare is a bit of a strong word, but what brings in a bit of a sense of anxiety is always good. Push that into the story, a bit like having your wallet stolen, for example, or getting into trouble with the exclamation marks. But then also try and then almost immediately balance that with something that is that brings some energy, either a bit of fun or actually, Sarah, you mentioned it, but after that event, for a couple of months, you were full of energy, right? You know, it kind of gave you some motivation. So a little bit of fear, a little bit of energy. The push-pull in the stories also works really well, and you can start from either side. It could be, you know, the fear of, if we don't deliver this project, we're going to have wasted X million dollars. It's not going to go well for us. But on the other side, if we do deliver the project, then imagine the results and how great that'll look on our CVs. You know, you can always do this balancing a bit the fear side and a bit the energy side, the push and the pull with your story. So if you add a little bit of that a couple of times in the story, it also has a great effect. people will pay more attention to the story if there's a little bit of danger, a little bit of excitement. If that makes sense. Yeah, maybe. Let's see. Yeah, so balancing the energy together and building that tension in the story is always going to help. And as you've seen, you can take any personal experience and apply it to any kind of business situation, whether it's about culture, whether it's about focus, whether it's about motivation. If Jamie's story was a bit of, I could sense a bit of self-motivation having ate those horrible meat-flavored lentils. Now he's in a different place. That's a great motivation, but also then respect, right? You can bring a lot of different factors into that as well. So here's another little quick exercise for you then. Recommending a raise. Let's go back here. Recommending a raise. You can also use stories for convincing people to do stuff. And, asking for a raise is always a difficult one, right? You can bring as many logical reasons why you should be paid more to Tom or someone like that. And it would be actually very difficult to convince him if you're bringing logical reasons, especially as he's a creative people person, right? Creative people person. Logic is not always the best way to convince Tom that he should give you more money. However, bring it in a story format, then you can transcend the communication preferences, and you will have a much greater chance of convincing then Tom to give you more money. Not that I'm proposing that you should go to Dom and ask him for more money. You can try it though, it'd be a bit of fun. So here's a little bit of a challenge. I'll walk you through and I'll give you a couple of minutes to think of a quick story to recommend a colleague for a raise. So not going for a raise for yourself, but recommending that Maya or Jamie or Isabella or Sarah should get a raise, right? So this is how you can very quickly structure an argument on anything, without the need to use logic, because logic will only work with one preference of communication. First of all, what do you know about the person, or what do you know about yourself that you're trying to get an argue across? And what do you want to build influence upon? So that's the first question to ask yourself. So here's a bit of an example then, what's in it for her? What's in it for the boss? What's the personality you're talking to? And what might appeal to that kind of personality, right? Second question, what specifically do you want them to think or do? Now that's different to the logical question. What do you want them to think, feel, or do? Especially if you put it in that frame. In the question of raise, for example, you might want them to think or feel that the person you're asking for a raise for is really adding value, for example, really adding value. And that's what you want them to think and feel, that they really are adding value. And then the last question is then, what story would help them step up to this? So, what story would be good for recommending a raise? And here you can, pick stories out of, something amazing that somebody's done. You can balance that with a little bit of fear that, maybe if they don't get a raise, then they'll start looking for something else. But you add to the excitement around then, if they do get a raise, think of what they could be and all of that good stuff, right? So 3 components of argumentative storytelling. What do you know about the people and you want to influence? So what's going to talk to them? What do you want them to think, feel, or do? And then what story would help them, would help put across the argument? Does that make sense? Questions?
Does Tom know you're doing this?
Hate me for it if you all turn up and say, hey, I think Sarah should really have a raise.
Yeah, I'll record this.
Recommend a raise for Sarah. Sarah, you should recommend a raise for Jamie. Jamie recommends a raise for Sarah. See what the response
Works
is.
perfectly.
It could be good, right? It could be good. It could be good. But it is relatively straightforward, especially when you bring it from a story angle. You can really build much better arguments. So take a couple of minutes then, give you maybe 3 minutes. Think about how you would structure a little story recommending a raise for somebody else. You could pick any of your team members. Think of somebody that you might have a good experience with that you can use in the story. So I'll give you 3 minutes and then we'll do a quick pitch to see if you can convince me that they need a raise. Go for it. I'll give you 3 minutes. Have a think how you could structure that little story, and then we'll practice a quick pitch.
Can we see the slides again?
Sure. Come on. So what do you know about the people you want to influence? What specifically do you want them to think, feel, or do?
Can I use you, Isabella? Do I have the permission?
Sure, you can.
And then what story can you pick on to help? Take another minute and we'll see what you've got. Good. How are we doing?
I can go, yeah.
Go for it. Let's hear the wonderful little story. Can you convince me that Isabella needs a raise?
Okay. So Mark, as you know,
Go
me and
for it,
Isabella, as you know, me and Isabella had a dinner with potential customers the other night. We went to a restaurant and we talked and discussed things, and Isabella was just amazing. They loved her. She really talked to them, and I think they are interested in working with us because of her. So the night was going great, like everything was fantastic. And they asked her like where she's from. She said Brazil. And then they asked her like, when's the last time you've been there? and she's like, oh, I'm saving up money, like the economy is rough and everything, so I haven't been there in like 2 years. I haven't seen my family, and they were really like shocked, and they felt bad for her. So like it got me thinking, like she's working so hard, and I think she got a bunch of new customers for us, and it's been amazing working with her. So I think she would really could use like a raise or something, a bonus, to just help motivate her and maybe go see her family a couple of times a year or something like that.
That was great, Sarah.
Good. I mean,
I think that's better than mine. Yeah.
you did really well. I mean, if I was putting myself in Tom's shoes, you chose a little topic that would definitely resonate with Tom, because he's a big extrovert, loves going out with clients, right? Good topic. You played a bit both. Great relationship with the clients, building that, bringing in future work. But there's the downside, can't go home, saving money. So that's a bit the push and the pull piece. Hard working. So then you come again with the thing, and a bonus would really motivate, right? Fantastic little story. Much more appealing than trying to come with logical facts. Isabella works 12 hours a day. Isabella's done 5 projects, this, that, and the other. Much, much more convincing than if you just come with the facts, right? Good stuff. Good stuff. Isabella, go.
I think I'm still going a little bit logical, but let's give it a try. So I have this, so my colleague, Ralph, he left the company, and we brought him in as an external consultant because we really needed him in this project. And now that he became an internal employee again, he is really under a lot of pressure as it was before. So in order, and apart from the fact that he's a brilliant employee and that he brings a lot of value to the company because he knows the enterprise for more than 10 years, he really knows a lot about information security. He knows the client already since the beginning because he helped sign the contract. And because he's under a lot of pressure, and because he already mentioned that he wasn't happy with the job before he signed up for it, I think we need to reward him somehow, either with a big raise or with giving him many days off as soon as our deadline is finished. I think Sarah was better than me, but
No,
I think I used logic.
Come on.
Also great. You
logic.
set it up nicely. Ralph left the company, got hired back as an external, then rejoined as an internal. That already gives a sense then of value, right? If they've left and they've been hired back as an external to continue doing the work, they're clearly valuable, and then hired back internally again. So good value. A little bit, setting the dilemma, highly under pressure. It's maybe not what he wanted to come back for. High value with 10 years, all that good stuff. Needs a danger of leaving, then reward them. And I like how you didn't fix on one reward. You gave a range of rewards. Give plenty of days off, give a bonus, give some kind of reward. And that's also a good mechanism, not to be too specific sometimes on the result that you want. It gives people a bit of flexibility, then thinks they're coming up with the ideas at the end of it. Good story, right? But again, so much better than just coming with a bunch of logical facts. A story transcends all of that stuff. So when it comes to arguing your case, arguing a business case, arguing a project, overcoming resistance from stakeholders, stories work so much better with your arguments than trying to come with facts and processes and pictures. Story, as they say, paints 1,000 pictures. No, I got that completely wrong. The story paints 1,000 words. Is that right? The saying goes.
Yeah, a picture paints.
A picture
says.
I messed that one up. I messed that one up completely. So taking it doesn't take a lot of time to think about a story. So that was the other reason for the practice. 3 minutes, you can come up with a story. It's going to have far greater impact sometimes than spending 2 hours on a PowerPoint presentation. If you can think up a story like that around the argument in just 3 minutes, or spend 2 hours on PowerPoint, which is going to serve you better? So don't use stories for everything. You've taken it too far. But, selecting the right moment to say, maybe a story is going to work much better here than a bunch of PowerPoint slides. Makes a lot of sense. Maybe last thing to mention, once you've got a bit of a seed of a story, just like you've gone through, you've all shared some good stories, then you can keep refining the story over time. Stories grow over time. They get better. You find the bits that work better. You can reduce the story down, make it more explicit and direct. It's worth having a few stories already in your backpack that you can pull out and use time and time again in different contexts. Make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, very, very, very useful. Very, very useful. So here's a couple of stories. The horse story is a great one. We did the beer story with the stones in the beer story. How I learned storytelling. It was a funny situation going way back now, maybe almost 20 years. Oh, that's a long time ago. I was working in manufacturing. We were making bathroom stuff. Lots of different components needed to go together. And I was trying to train people on how to build some new bits of bathroom stuff. And the workforce that we had, they weren't so bright, right? They were just people used to putting stuff together, and getting them to remember complex part numbers, each of these little components like a bolt, a screw, mirror, things, they all have component numbers, right? And some of the component numbers were very complex, like 8 to 12 different digits and letters that you kind of had to remember to get the right one to put together. And so I was working with one lady on the manufacturing floor, trying to work out how to put this together and remember all of these numbers in one particular product, like 120 different components. And I asked her, how do you remember all of the component numbers? And she told me a story. And she said, imagine a pink elephant holding a glass full of champagne. And in that glass of champagne, there's one of those little cocktail umbrellas. The little umbrellas you can get to put in glasses. And she says, on that umbrella is the number 5813. Pink elephant wearing a top hat now. Pink elephant wearing a top hat, holding a glass of champagne. On the umbrella, 5813. That's how she was able to remember 120 or so different, very complex numbers. And I was like, how, wow, where did you learn that? And so she picked it up because she was never very good at writing things down. So she had to find a way of remembering complex numbers in her head. I was amazed. What's even more amazing is that is a true story. 20 years on, I still remember the number on the umbrella, 5813. Pink elephant, top hat, holding a champagne glass on the umbrella. The number's 5813. Can remember it as clearly as it was 20 years ago. And that's how I learned storytelling, through this lady that was telling me all of these kind of like little stories, just little stories, little things like that, that would really stick with me and I would remember. And so I kind of practiced off the back of that then a variety of stories. And I realized if I want to really convince people to do things, motivate them, overcome arguments, teach them, train them, then I could use stories as a key part of everything that I do. And I still do, and they're fantastic. They're always the thing after a training, for example, that people remember. Often people forget the content, but they remember the stories. It's a nice one.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. And it reminds me of a technique called Mind Palace.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a technique like where you can also I learned about it, how people like learn lists of random objects. So you can learn like a list of 100 objects or more if you just imagine yourself in a room and then you start placing those random objects. And if you like build on that room in your head, like you're able to walk into it and just list like all 100 of them. So I used it when I was in medical school. Anatomy was like the biggest subject, and like I think there is unlimited information that you can like learn when you are like preparing those exams. So I was just like trying to come up with something similar. Like it's so amazing, like what people do in their heads to like on daily basis to remember like numbers or things. It's pretty great.
Yeah, it's a good method to practice. Good method to practice. So many stories, and we'll try and keep the stories coming throughout the rest of the sessions that we have. Last quick minute for just summing up then. So really use stories when you're in the situation where you have to influence people, overcome resistance, got a good argument to make, when you need to motivate people and inspire people, and when you need to educate people. So those are the three reasons to use good stories. And in summary, you can always think of a good story like the horse or the pink elephant or the stones and the beer. Use the fear and the energy, the push and pull within that. Have a start, middle, end, and result. I think that's a very straightforward, approach. And you can really come up with stories within a few minutes. And sometimes those stories can be far more effective than lots of PowerPoint slides, lots of logical arguments, because they'll always speak to everybody, and they'll overcome and transcend the communication preferences. All you need to do is open with the sentence that starts, "Let me tell you a story." Immediately you'll get people's attention. So really useful storytelling in business, especially when you're doing projects, all of this kind of good stuff. Next time we have innovation and creativity. So how you can really capture innovation and get people set up to be very creative, which in a lot of big businesses, creativity gets squashed, gets put down very quickly in big business. When you're working every day in an office, it's difficult to be creative sometimes. So we'll talk about how you can accelerate innovation and creativity, and how you can drive that innovation into practical solutions as well. So that's what we'll cover next week, and I will set up a new time then, Thursday 10 o'clock, then going forward from next week. Any questions, thoughts before we sign off?
Well, this was a perfect way to end this week, I think, with a little bit of storytelling and acting, and it's been great. Thank you, Mark.
Excellent. You are welcome. Having lots
Thank
of
you,
fun.
Mark.
Very good. Then have a fantastic weekend.
You too.
You as well.
Cheers. Bye
Bye,
now.
guys.
Good one.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Mark.